Okay, guys, so thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Andrew Lee Carter. I work with the Careers Service here at the University of Newcastle. I hope that many of you are already familiar with the Careers Service, and if you're not, I would invite you to come along and participate. When I say participate, come and see us, come and have a chat with us. We can do all sorts of things to help you in terms of your next steps in relation to your career. And what I'm talking about there is predominantly at this stage is job application processes and what have you. So what we're going to talk about today is really about the whole job application process. So looking at assessment requirements, application of documents, job opportunities, resumes, responding to selection criteria and cover letters is a part of the process. We're not going to talk about those today, but if you think about an application, normally an application, whether you're applying for a position within a university, or if you're in academia, or if you're applying for a position in industry, there is an application that's required. And usually that will involve a cover letter, it will involve a resume, it may not necessarily involve a selection criteria, although if you're doing academia, it most likely will. In industry, it may not. But just before we jump into that, I guess the first really thing that I wanted to really ask people is, what's your understanding of a resume and what's your understanding of a CV? Is there a difference? Would anybody like to perhaps comment on that? If you are good, I see Jackie's turned the mic on. Go ahead, Jackie.
I've got no idea. I didn't even know that there was a difference. That's what
Okay,
I'd like
good.
to share.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm glad that you said that, because that's probably what I was hoping somebody would say. And I can promise you that Jackie and I did not meet earlier and say, Jackie asked this question. But in all honesty, if you think about a CV is a curriculum vitae, is your entire history. Okay, so it's looking at all the things that you've exactly. So CV would have more details, and so many of you will have done a lot of research, and you may have a number of publications and what have you to your name. And so on a CV, you would put all that information down, and you detail every single thing that you've done, and it might end up being 8, 9, 10 pages, whatever the case may be. A resume, on the other hand, is a summary, and it's a small summary of your professional life, if you like. So it's a much shortened version of the CV. And in this case, if we talk about your publications, an employer may not necessarily be interested in knowing every single publication that you've actually put together. And so from that perspective, I just want to be very clear from the outset that what we're talking about today is essentially a resume. It's not a CV. So please don't confuse the two. Okay, so looking at that, a couple of things that I did want to talk about today are really going to be in relation to the HDR labour market. So as I said, people will potentially want to be working in academia, or they may want to be working in industry. So whilst I'm going through this, maybe people can in the chat room can just write down whether you're looking at potentially working in an academic role, or maybe you're wanting to work in industry. If you can just maybe jot that down. And we'll go through and we'll have a little bit of a look at the labour market. We'll talk about a little bit on self-reflection, the difference between academia and this industry, some of the myths that are out there, employers' perspective. So what are employers looking for when they want to have somebody join their organisation, and then just some other considerations in terms of industry skills and how we apply within industry. So I've had one person who's popped back a message and they've said industry. Anybody else want to let us know whether so another industry? Good. So we've got a couple of people saying industry. New South Wales Health, good. Okay, so yeah, New South and Health is industry, so that's fine. Okay, so if we look here, we say, well, where do Australia's current PhD students want to work? Now, a large number of people do PhDs and what have you because they do want to work in a university environment. They want to continue to work in research. But then other people might end up going into a large global or national enterprise, and somebody just mentioned there, and Naguen just mentioned an international organisation. So there are a number of international or large organisations that one could work for, and not necessarily in Australia. It could be anywhere in the world. There's government or public services, there's startups or SMEs, not-for-profits, and a various range of others. So the point is that there's a number of different places where people can look at work opportunities within using their postgraduate qualifications. Okay, so if we think about the HDR labour market, there are many more graduates or many more PhD graduates than academic jobs available. So this is, particularly in the current environment, I mean, even this university at the moment is going through a restructure or a change management process, and there's a number of subjects, courses that have been cut back, and as a consequence of that, that means that there's less jobs within the academic environment. So that's something that we have to be conscious of. So if that's the case, it might mean that some people that might want to work in the academic environment might say, well, actually, given that I'm facing this dilemma, I may have to look somewhere outside of academia. So there is a growing percentage of PhD graduates who are finding employment in businesses, in government, and in non-profit sectors. So that's something that that's definitely an option for you. Now, when I say that, that's not to put people off and say, well, when I was, Andrew was saying that there's not as many PhD graduate positions, therefore I should walk away and not worry about working the PhD in the university environment. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm just saying that it's like anything, it's a competitive environment, and you need to think about this in context of what your options are, both within the university sector and outside of the university sector as well. If there are any questions, please do ask. So Jackie made the comment that she would be interested to work anywhere that she can get work. So here are some of the main industries that traditionally do hire PhD candidates in Australia. So the banking, financial services, and insurance sector is a large employer of HDR graduates. Mining, oil, and energy. So again, Australia is particularly strong in that sector. The medical and pharmaceutical environment, management, consulting, and accounting, civil engineering, which is good if you've studied a civil engineering type of degree, law and legal services, telecommunications, computer software, and information technology. So this just gives you, as you can see, it's quite a broad range of industries that do employ our postgraduate or graduates. And if we look at the HDR labour market, this graph, really just talks a little bit about the spread of the PhD employment by size of company. So you can see that there's a very small number that work in that self-employed sector, but then 5.9%, are between 1 to 10 people employed, until you get to the majority of people that work in with organisations are those larger organisations that employ around 1,000 to 5,000 people. But again, then you've also got the very large companies that employ 10,000 plus. Okay, so Australia's existing growth sectors lead PhD employment. So many PhD employers are aligned with the nation's growth sectors related to medicine, pharmaceuticals, advanced manufacturing, mining, and finance. So we live in a country that is quite innovative. We live in a world at the moment where there's lots of change happening and lots of innovation happening. So again, there are significant opportunities ahead for PhDs to work with young global startups and innovative Australian high growth employers. We're seeing in Australia at the moment a massive, shift or change because of the whole influence of COVID. And I mean, I don't want to spend the whole day today talking about COVID-19, but it's something that if you're thinking about what you want to do beyond your study, then what you need to think about in context of a situational analysis, knowing what's happening in the market, knowing what's happening within the industry that you're interested in. Are there any particular trends or influences that are impacting on that industry, and where is that industry actually headed? And that's important for you as employees to know what's happening within that industry sector that you're potentially interested in. And that's going to be very important that you think about that in context of when you are sitting in front of a prospective employer, and you are speaking about wanting to work for that organisation, it's really important that you have a really good understanding of what's happening in the industry, and you have a good understanding of what's happening with what that company does and what projects they're working on and what have you. So I'm just planting that seed right now, because the one thing that if you take nothing else away from this discussion today, the one thing that I do want you to take away is that when you're applying for a position, your qualifications are very, very important, but you have to ensure that you tailor your application to the employer. Some of the things that I get people who, well, I hear about people who sometimes say, you know, I've applied for 10, 20, 30 jobs and I haven't received a response from anybody. That's usually because people are sending out a standard resume that they send out to everybody, and it says all these good things about what the person's done, but it doesn't actually it doesn't respond to the selection criteria or the whatever it is that the organisation is looking for. So some of the things that I want you to think about is, if you're applying for an organisation, or even a university, the first thing you need to know is, what are the values of that organisation? What are they? What is that organisation? What's their mission? What are they? What sort of people are they looking to employ that are similar to them? And the second thing is to know the skills that they're looking for. How do you meet the skill set that they're wanting you to essentially implement when you're working in that environment? Okay, so that's just something I just want to plant, because we'll be talking about that when we get to the resume section. But the other thing that, getting back to the COVID-19 and the impact, we know that many sectors have been hit quite significantly. University sector is a good example of it. We've seen a situation here in Australia. Even we had the budget the other night, but we've seen a situation here in Australia where a number of Australian universities have had to adjust because of the number of international students that didn't come last year as a consequence of COVID. Interesting that this morning the New South Wales government came out and with a statement saying that they are going to open the borders for international students, which is a great initiative, but it's not consistent with what the Australian government's saying. So again, we're still in a situation where the recovery rates are going to be different for different organisations, or different industries. So the airline industry, the university sector, whatever it might be, there's going to be a different time frame before these things do essentially recover. So it could be that some areas it may take 5 years. In other areas, it might be more fortunate, it might take 2 years, but it's a little bit of an unknown. So again, we're going into very much uncharted waters. So here is just a little bit of a map, again, that looks at what some of the impacts are around the recovery. As we see, education is pretty significant and what have you. It's really high on this map. And then there's other areas that are there. I won't go through them. It's just probably more just as a little bit of a visual in terms of where it might sit. Any questions on any of that so far? Okay, so if we think about I mentioned before skills. So if I'm talking about skills, when we talk about skills, we talk about those technical skills firstly, which are the things that that you've really been developing whilst you're studying at university in a particular area of specialisation. But there are several, if we think about the emerging skills that are part of this shifting labour market that's occurring at the moment, some of those things are things like data and artificial intelligence. So, big data is massive now. If you think about every organisation now can carry data about customers, and it can very intimate data, and there's a lot of legal laws emerging as a consequence of all this data which organisations hold. So it's a really interesting space. But you've got the data and artificial intelligence, as I said. You've got that care economy. So as we have an aging population, so it means that there's a high requirement for health professionals in that care economy. We have the green economy as a consequence of being now more environmentally aware and more environmentally concerned. We have the engineering and cloud computing, so the whole area of the cloud has really emerged significantly, particularly in this situation with COVID. We've seen a massive shift in terms of the way people are using technology. So some organisations who might have been thinking to shift towards the digital economy down the track have had to do it a lot quicker. And so there's been a massive shift in the way people behave from a consumer behaviour perspective, but also the way people behave from a business perspective. We have our culture is impacted. We've got product development, sales, marketing, and content. These are all different areas that are being impacted by what's happening in our world. And so, little quote here: according to the World Economic Forum, 6.1 million new job opportunities in the coming years. So we see a massive shift in terms of the type of jobs that might exist out there in the business world. But because there is this transition happening, every time we think, all right, so there's an industry where there's so many jobs have been lost, but on the same in the same way that jobs are leaving, there's others that are emerging. And so there's, as we say, this transition into the new world will be both human and tech-centric. Okay, so from that perspective, this is all about you. When we think about job applications and what we're going to do with our futures and where we want to take things, it's essentially thinking about it from your perspective, because every one of you will be quite different. Can I just have an indication of what sort of studies people have been doing? So if you're been doing a PhD, what have you been doing that in? If you're doing something else, what have you been doing it in? It'd be nice just to get a bit of a sense of what people are studying. Perhaps people can comment in the chat box. PhD in exercise and sports science, PhD in English, psychology, great, grad dip in psychology, masters in health management, policy and economics. Okay, so it's quite a diverse range. Creative industries is a really interesting one because again, it's an area which is it's growing, it's new, it's emerging, and in many respects, there's a lot of jobs at the moment which we still don't know. They're still evolving, or we still don't know what it actually means. PhD in geotechnical engineering, PhD in agriculture by molecular biology. Just the agricultural one, I'm really, I don't know if people have seen in the news, but very interesting at the moment. There's a massive mouse plague in Western New South Wales, and there was some media about that yesterday, just talking about the number of mice that are just impacting the whole agricultural world at the moment, which tough world. If you've been working out on the farms and what have you, one year it's drought, the next year it's floods, the next year it's fire, and now you've got a mouse plague as well. So I think, yeah, the PhD in agriculture would be very welcome in some of those places, I would anticipate. Okay, so whoops, sorry, I went too far then. Okay, so let's just think a little bit of a self-reflection. So people have given us a little bit of information around what you've studied. But I guess the question that I would like to you to consider is what motivated you to start your high degree research project or program, and where did you hope it would lead, and what are the challenges? What challenges are you facing now, and has anything changed since you first enrolled? Would anybody like to either comment via the chat room or even turn your mics on and give us a little bit of a self-reflection in that regard? I think this is a really good, a really important question. What motivated you to start your studies? It's all gone quiet.
Okay, I'll talk.
Thank you.
I embarked on my PhD because I'm a writer. I was already writing a novel, and a PhD provided me with a really small stipend that enabled me to take 2 days off work so I could dedicate that to some writing. But I've found that as a humanities student, I've worked in all sorts of jobs, and it's studying humanities has made me very flexible, and if I don't know the skills, or I don't have the skills, I know how to find out I know where to find out how to do things and to train myself to do them.
Okay, wonderful. I'd really love to talk to you more about the novel writing, what have you. I think that's really, really interesting. The fact that you went, well, I'm going to do some studies, which then allows me some time to essentially work towards something that I'm passionate about. So that's a very good motivation. Where did you hope it would lead? What challenges are you facing now? Again, there are all sorts of things that as you're progressing through a degree, and if it is a 3 or 4 year degree, or PhD being 4 years, a lot changes in 4 years. And so, again, has anything changed since you first enrolled?
Well, I enrolled. I think I finished my PhD. My book was subsequently won an award for an unpublished manuscript, and it was picked up and published by Fremantle Press over in WA. So I don't think a lot has changed in terms of the PhD space. I'm working as a research assistant now within the university, and I work a lot with HDR students. The only thing,
Excuse me.
That's okay. The only thing that I've found that has changed a lot since I did my PhD is the technological kind of stuff, in terms of being able to use sort of SharePoint, those sorts of things. But other than that, really, it's the literature reviews are the same, the studies the same, the supervisory relationships maybe have changed, hopefully for the better. Yeah.
Sure. I think what's really interesting in terms of things that have changed, though, is if you consider when I remember being an undergraduate student, and I used to come to university and I'd go to a lecture or a tutorial, and they say, next week you need to read this journal article, and the journal article will be sitting in the short loan section in the university, and everybody could go and borrow it for 20 minutes so that you effectively photocopy it. And that was the journal article that everybody spoke about. Whereas now we're in a situation where we have so much information at our fingertips. Everything's available to us via all these digital mediums. And I guess the reason I'm raising that is because in the industrial world and in the academic world, places that you're going to work, this is what's happening. There's all this access to all this information, which once upon a time was not available, or at least was available in small snippets. And so we are so surrounded by all this information. Now, the reason that that's relevant is because, again, as graduates, as people looking for work in other spaces, employers are going to essentially be looking at your digital footprint. Okay, so that's going to we're going to see that. So it's important that we're going to talk about resumes today, but I think this series of talks that we're having here, there's another one coming up which is around your LinkedIn profile. So if you haven't got a LinkedIn profile, I'd be very much encouraging you to make sure that you do have one, or get it up to date, and come along to that workshop, because it will be quite important in context of the whole job application process. Just an interesting post here from Louise. So, to become more employable, lost my job in elite sports due to postpone of Olympic Games, and my sport went under major organisational restructure. To get back into the industry nowadays, it's so competitive. Team sports organisations won't look at anything less than a PhD. Yes, again, I can. That's a really good point. There's a lot of organisations, both if you were thinking about it from an academic perspective. Once upon a time, if you had a master's degree, it was quite possible, quite reasonable that you could teach in an MBA. Whereas now, because of a lot of universities are now looking at their accreditation, and their accreditation means that they want to get higher rankings and what have you. So they're pushing everybody towards the having a PhD focus. So again, this is what's happening in the real world. So having those qualifications is super important, but it's also there's a lot of other things that surround that, which we look at now in this diagram here. So if you think about your career development journey, it will go through several different phases throughout your life. So it helps you determine your desired career and direction. So if you think about your career development, you've got to know yourself. Okay, so what we mean by knowing yourself is, what are your values? What are your interests? What are your strengths, your traits, your ambitions? Now, if we just look at values for a moment, a lot of times people will organise to not organise. They'll apply for a position, and what they do is they talk about themselves in context of everything that is important to me as a professional. But as an employer, what I'm really interested in is, how do your values align with our values or my values? And so what's important when you're looking at your job, when you're looking at a job advertisement and you're looking at a particular organization, what you've got to do is essentially have an understanding of what that organization does. So if we just go to if we're considering this from the perspective of a cover letter, which we're not going to talk about today, but if we think about it from the perspective of cover letter, people will often write something to the effect of, I wish to apply for a position with your organisation, which whatever it is, right? Now, the first thing I say is that you're not wishing, you're actually applying. So you wouldn't write, I wish to apply. You'll be saying directly, I'm applying for the position of whatever it is, which I saw advertised on seek.com on this particular date. The reason I'm applying for this position is because I know the values of your company are collaboration, empowerment, that sort of thing, right? So it's important that you think about your values and the organization's values, and you align them, not just talk about your values in isolation. If you think about your interests, it's all about aligning the interests that you have with the organization. This is really important. So you do need to know yourself, but you need to know the organization as well. So you need to explore options, need to explore what's out there. You need to do some research, get an understanding of what's happening in the industry, and get an understanding of what career options exist for your degree. Now, if you're not sure, we have some wonderful career counsellors here at the Career Service who can help you to get focused in terms of what some of those career options might be that you need to pursue. So again, moving on to the getting focused, we want to have some sort of action plan in place. We want to set some goals. We want you to make some decisions. The really difficult part of career development is that sometimes people are indecisive. And so people want to go in a particular direction, but they're indecisive because there's that, maybe if I go this way, I'm going to miss out on something else. So there's a little bit of fear of missing out. So what we want to consider is, how do we make a decision that's a good decision for us from a career perspective, and that's about getting focused. Once you know yourself, you've explored your options, and you've got a bit of focus, then you take the action. And so many of you are now at this point because you've entered a particular, you're focused on a particular area of study, and the reason you did that was because you identified within yourself what you wanted, you explored your options, you now focused on that activity. Now we want to take action in the sense of saying, well, now we need to try and do a job search, we need to connect with employers, we need to gain some experiences. A big push from within the university sector and even from the government sector now is that undergraduate students are now being pushed into this work integrated learning environment. So it's no longer just about having a degree, it's about having some experience, it's about having some understanding of what the employer is looking for. Sorry, does somebody have a question? Just thought I heard a microphone. Please do ask if you do have a question, it's fine. So some career planning key competencies. So planfulness, develop deeper self-awareness. Your values will help guide decision-making amidst various possibilities. So again, a big emphasis on your values. Appreciation of chance opportunities. So sometimes you just fall into something. So it's quite interesting that the role that I do here was not something I ever planned to do. So my background is in marketing, and through circumstance, I ended up in a careers environment. So now that was depending on your perspective on it. It was good luck or bad luck. But the point is that it presented some opportunities. There's also that curiosity and exploration. So sometimes people are curious, we explore, and that's how we get somewhere. And then it's active engagement in a range of activities, and then just strengthening confidence to pursue aspirations. Okay, so academia versus industry. This, again, if we think about academia, one would assume is a slower, casual, and flexible atmosphere. It's that intellectual autonomy that you can have because you can have greater freedom in terms of doing some research. There's greater freedom determining your job role and tasks. Disagreeing with the boss or the university's corporate line is considered part of the process. So would you agree with that, I guess, is probably a question I would be interested to know, because I would agree with some of it, but I just wonder whether you would agree with that. But from an academic perspective, some people would like to enter academia because they see it to be something of this nature. But academia can spread you too thin. So we're asking you to do teaching, we're asking you to do research, we're asking you to do publishing. You can experience frustration because impact is not immediate, and I can tell you that in recent times, some colleagues and I have written a journal article. We've submitted it to yes, Jackie, and a bunch of admin, absolutely. We've submitted it to 3 different places, and we've been knocked back on all 3. So again, it's not immediate. Ability to pursue research opportunities is frequently dependent on funding. So it's not just a case of saying, well, I'll go and do some research. You have to find some funding, and that can be difficult. And then there's that flexibility that can turn into the flexibility you work more. And as Jackie said, there's a whole lot of admin which goes under the radar for a lot of that. What does industry offer? So industry will offer you experience in industry will vary greatly depending on whether they are in startups or in multinational companies. So as we mentioned before, there's a whole range of different type of industries that you could potentially be working in, but they will be different. In the academic setting, experience will be different for researchers in small schools compared to those in large research institutions. But industry can offer you impact, it can offer you freedom, it can potentially offer you more money. So again, if we think about some common assumptions, is that academia is more flexible, that industry plays more, academia provides more room for intellectual autonomy, industry is more practical. The one people in academia are those who can't make it in industry, or the only people, sorry. So again, is that true? Is it true that the only people in academia are those who can't make it in industry? Of course, we would challenge that. And then industry-based professionals do not have the same level of insight into complex problems as academics, which again, I would challenge that wholeheartedly. So myth or reality? Academia is more flexible. What do people think? Any thoughts? Is academia more flexible or not? Nobody's willing to.
It is in the humanities, or where I am.
It is or isn't? Sorry, Jackie, it is or it isn't?
Yeah, no, in the humanities, it isn't.
It isn't, okay. Yeah, so on the whole, academia does provide...
No, sorry.
You're right, go ahead. I've lost you.
Sorry, it is.
It is.
Yeah,
all right.
I'll put it in the... Yes,
it's a matter of opinion. It's a matter of opinion. So on the whole, academia provides more opportunities for flexible working hours and autonomy in deciding where and how you work. So, and I mean, that's interesting because I guess if you look at what's happening now as a consequence of COVID, there are a lot more people working from home now. So maybe 3 years ago, academia did provide more flexibility in that regard. Maybe now it's changed a little bit. And that, again, it would be until you're in that space, it's hard to determine. But things to note, it's great to choose how you work. However, there is a fine line between flexibility that helps you achieve a better work-life balance and flexibility for work to creep into every aspect of your life. I know that certainly when I've worked in an academic role, it's not uncommon for me to spend a weekend marking papers. And so again, that's there is flexibility, but it's both ways. Okay, industry pays more. Does industry pay more? Anybody have an opinion on this one? So, sorry, I've got I can hear things coming up, but I can't see them. Oh, actually, this is why. Here we go. Okay, so industry tends to the employment market skill shortage is surplus. Okay, so industry there tends to be I guess a perception that industry does pay more, and in many cases it will. But salaries versus specialist contract consultancy work, how well can you sell yourself and your skills is going to be a part of that as well. Myth or reality, the only people in academia are those who can't make it in industry, and industry-based professionals do not have the same level of insight into complex problems as academics. That's, as it says here, a load of rubbish. Academia is filled with many very bright people who could make it very well in industry, who are chased by industry. And again, we also see the opposite happening in industry with people who would be very good academics. But the difference that does exist, it's fair to say, is culture. So there is a culture that exists within academia, and there's a culture which exists within industry. And within different industries themselves, there's different cultural sets that occur there. So these are all valid things that need to be considered when you're applying for a work environment, you're applying for work. Okay, so thinking about this from the employer's perspective, what is an employer looking for when they're really wanting to hire someone? It says here, what do employers consider as the most important when hiring? Is it competence? Is it technical skills and softer skills? Is it the fit, so where you fit into the organization? Or is it your potential? Is it your willingness and speed of learning? Any thoughts on that? What do employers consider as the most important when hiring? Anybody? Competence, good, yes. Anything else? So I'm going to tell you a little story. So we had we were interviewing some speech pathologists, and we had 5 speech pathologists that we were interviewing, and it would be fair to say that there was one particular standout who, on paper, was extremely competent. Okay, so she basically had HDs all the way, and on paper was the best candidate. However, when we interviewed that particular student or speech pathologist, that person was unable to maintain eye contact with the interviewer, was not able to smile, was very overwhelmed by the interview, and communication skills were quite challenged or poor. So from that perspective, the student was highly competent from an academic perspective, but not those transferable soft skills, which are really important, were not what they needed to be. And so from the employer's perspective, they felt they couldn't put that person in front of their customers and in front of their other team members because that particular person didn't have good communication skills. And so what I want you to think about is it's not just about those technical skills that you might have that make you competent. It's also about those softer skills. And that's highly important that you bring that out in your resume. If you think about an employer's perspective, when they're looking to hire somebody, so they'll bring on a new hire. So this graph, if you look at it from the left-hand side, they'll bring on a new hire, and it's going to take a significant amount of time before that person, firstly, in terms of costs, whether it's cost of time or costs financially, it's going to take a significant amount of time before that person becomes somebody that's contributing back to the organization. So we have what we'll call the break-even point, but then we have also the point where the person is actually making money for the organization. So if I'm going to invest 6 months or 12 months of my resources into a new employee, then I want to make sure that that employee is committed to what we do and wants to be here long term. So again, these are the sorts of things that we need to be able to identify in our resume, but we don't identify that in terms of saying, I will stay for 5 years. We identify it in terms of the skills and competencies that we have that demonstrate that we're a good candidate that's going to continue to contribute to our organisation longer term. So that again it's an important that you. We'll talk about that when we get to the resume in terms of how we might do that. But what the employer wants to know is this. And these are the three main things the employer wants to know. They want to know, firstly, can you do the job? Okay, so your resume, your letter, so your cover letter, and if there's selection criteria, is what they use to assess whether you can do the job. So once you've submitted your application, they'll look over your resume. So how long do you think people look at a resume for when they receive them? So let's say I've got 200 resumes that are sitting on my desk. How long am I going to look at them for? Any thoughts? 5 minutes, 30 seconds, 10 minutes? Okay, I'm going to go with 30 seconds. Okay, so because if I'm an employer and I've got 200 job applications on my desk and I'm pretty busy, I'm not going to spend 10 minutes on an application. I'm not even going to spend 5 minutes reading it. What I'm looking for is the key words that I've put in my job advertisement. I'm looking for those key words that tell me that you can do the job. Okay, so if you think about this is more from an undergraduate level where people might be applying for a graduate program. But if we receive 1,000 applications, there's no way known to man that somebody's going to go through and read every single one. What they do is they put it through a word identification software, and if those keywords are not in your application, nobody ever reads the application. And so that's why it's really important that when you're looking at applying for a job, you have to look at what the job advertisement says, what the selection criteria is, what skills they're looking for, what the values of the company are, so that you can include that in your resume, those words, that terminology, so that indicates to me that you can do the job. Okay, so that's the first thing. The second thing the employer wants to know is, will you do the job? Will you do the job means, what's your motivation? Why do you want to work for my organisation? Okay, so if you think about it from a perspective of the values of the organisation, and I mentioned earlier the reason that I've applied for this position is because you have values of X, Y, and Z. The employer wants to know that you've done your research on them. Okay, so firstly, you want to work for my organisation because you know what we do, you know what we're about, you know what our values are, and you align with all of that. Okay, so it's not whether you've got all these skills in all these areas that are very good skills, but not necessarily what we're looking for. That's not going to get you the job. What's going to get you the job is having a really clear understanding of the organisation and knowing how you align with what they're looking for. And then the third thing that's going to get you the job is which is the will you fit in question, is how do you fit in with our culture? How do you fit in with what we do as an organisation? How are you working with my team? How will you work with me as your boss? So it's that, and it's not, when I say cultural fit, I'm not talking about whether you're from a particular religion or whether you're from a particular country. It's the cultural fit in terms of how will you fit into our organisational culture. You know, do you have the same mindset as us? Are you somebody that works pedantically like we do? So again, they're the sorts of things that you need to consider when you're putting that job application together. Okay, and so from an organisation's perspective, we say, well, there's got to be purpose, there's got to be potential, there's got to be perspective. And what that's saying is that if I'm going to employ you, then the reason I'm employing you is because I've got a good reason to do it. I see some potential, okay, in you in terms of an employee, and you know I have perspective on what we want to do. So again, from that point of view, the organisation is looking at you in context of what values you align with, what skills you bring to the organisation. So here are the employability skills. So I mentioned before, you've got to have the qualification. That's important. But here are the top 10 employability skills an employer is looking for. So I already mentioned the idea of communication skills. People want to know that you can communicate. That's important. And communication is not just, I know how to speak. It's about being able to listen. It's about being able to communicate both verbally and in writing. And it's about being able to work with other people and being able to ensure that everybody knows what you're trying to communicate and that you're able to interpret them as well. Teamwork is the next one, which is particularly important. Again, when we talk about teamwork, everybody here has worked in a teamwork environment, whether it's at university, whether it's in a previous job, whether it's in a sporting environment. Teamwork is something that we all do in one format or another, as is communication. Problem solving, showing some initiative, leadership skills, managing, organising, and time management. Again, people who have done PhD courses or any postgraduate course have had to organise and time manage, and often many of those people are doing things whilst trying to juggle part-time jobs or full-time jobs or whatever it might be. So you've got those skills, that you develop those in other areas. Negotiating and persuading, lifelong learning is important. Decision making, creativity, and innovation. So just looking at those 10 employability skills, and I've already mentioned a few of them, but where can you develop these skills outside of your study? Where can you and where have you developed them? Anyone got a part-time job? Being a parent. And look, I know that that's absolutely correct. Being a parent does build resilience, it builds leadership skills, it builds time management skills. So that's definitely an important and often underestimated area of where we learn to do things. An internship is absolutely correct. So if you've been on internship or if you've worked as a volunteer, any type of work experience is definitely contributing to your employability skills. Tutor is definitely something that if you've worked as a tutor, but I'll also say that if you worked at Coles or Woolworths behind the as a checkout person, that's developing those transferable skills, because you have to communicate with people, you have to problem solve, you have to, you're potentially leading a team, you have to work within a team, you have to make decisions. So again, don't underestimate where you're developing those skills. It's important that you put all of this information on your resume. Okay, so from postgraduate capabilities, we know that you as postgraduate candidates have got critical, creative, and analytical thinking and effective problem solving. You've done that as part of your degree. You will have effective communication. It's funny that I stumbled on that word, isn't it? I'll start again. You will have effective communication in a variety of contexts and modes. The capacity for lifelong learning. As we mentioned before, the world is not static. The industry you work in, the markets we work in are not static. There's constant change. And so lifelong learning is a part of that. The ability to work independently and collaboratively. So if you're working in a team, you do have to work with other people, but then you also have to do things on your own to ensure that other people are getting the benefit of that. The social and ethical responsibility and an understanding of Indigenous and international perspectives is another one that comes out. So definitely, again, there's so many situations in industry where things happen, and is it ethically responsible? Is it, if you're in an organisation that is doing something that's unethical, what do you do? There are things to think about. But characteristics of self-reliance and leadership. So these are all things that you've developed in your studies. Okay, so the part that we really want to talk about now is the creating of a professional resume. Now, I am going to say to you, I'm going to give you some information around the resumes today, but we have a number of resources which I would encourage you to use, which are around the resume building, and it's around how to address certain requirements that an employer is looking for in a resume. So I'll point you towards those towards the end. But before we go there, how many people here have got a resume, and who needs to write one? Have people here already got a resume? Just maybe let us know in the chat room. Okay, so most people are saying they have one, which is great. My next question is, okay, good, Alana's saying yes, but old. So my question is, how many people have got a resume and they've actually had someone from the career service look over it? Jackie's saying she's got about 25. Wow, Jackie, we need to talk. Okay, so a few people saying no, they haven't been. So again, I would encourage you that this is really the starting point. So what we're talking about today is not, it's not a case of we get off this discussion today and you're now ready to go. This is the starting point, and it's important that you do come and have somebody look at your resume and just help you in that regard. Okay, so the purpose of a resume, we kind of already spoke about this a little bit earlier, but it's a summary of your education, employment experience, skills, and extracurricular life. And the extracurricular life can't be underestimated because there's, you know, some people like to play in football teams or sporting teams. Other people like international travel. This is all very important information for us as an employer. I'm interested in that because it helps me to know a little bit about you. The resume is a marketing document to promote your suitability to a prospective employer, going back to the can you do the job question. Okay, so that's important. And really important, the resume should be targeted for the specific role. So often we have situations where people who have a postgraduate degree might apply for something which is not at the postgraduate level. And so you've got to really target opportunities that are at your level. Okay, so that's important because if you write a resume, you'll often get people come back to you and say, look, I've looked at your resume and you meet all the criteria, but you're overqualified and we think you'll get bored doing this job. So please aim your application at the level of the position. And so that's an important thing to consider as well. So how to get started is understanding the type of responsibilities required for the role. So often when they advertise a role, they'll put on there what the responsibilities are, and they'll also put on there what the selection criteria is. And that selection criteria is in relation to the skills list that they're looking for, and you need to ensure that you can meet that skills list, those requirements. Now, often there's a person there might be a contact name on that advertisement. The one thing that I would encourage you all to do before you ever apply for a position is that when you see an advertisement for a position and you see somebody's name next to the advertisement, I would suggest that you contact that person and that you have a conversation with them about the position. And the reason that I encourage people to do that is because most people don't do it. And what you're doing when you do make that phone call is that you're making a first impression. And so once you've made that first impression, they then keep you front of mind, so long as you've made a good impression, I have to add. But they will keep you front of mind, and then they're essentially looking for your application. And that's a much better way to go about it than to just submit an application and hope that they contact you. Then the other things you need to do is list facts about your education and qualifications, your employment experience, achievements and interests relevant to the role and the organisation. Now, emphasis on that part, relevant to the role and organisation. So to put it in very simple terms, I have situations where I see a resume and somebody's applying for a position in engineering, for example, but as a student, they've been working at a local bar, which means that they've got an RSA, which is a responsible service of alcohol certificate. And they might have a barista qualification as well. Now, my point is that you don't need to put that on your resume for this role that you're applying for if it's in engineering, because you're never going to be serving alcohol, well, at least you shouldn't be, serving alcohol in an engineering role, and the barista qualification is not relevant either. So you need to put things down that are relevant. So that's a really important one, because often people will get carried away with all their additional qualifications and put stuff that's not applicable to the role. The other important thing is that you need to identify your employability skills. So when you're putting your application together, you've put your contact details at the top, you've put your education at the top. Well, your resumes, I should have started this by saying there's not one way to write a resume. There's many different ways that we can write a resume. But in the event that you're doing it, that you put your education first, that's fine. You put your qualifications on there. But when you get to the point where you're talking about experiences, what I really want to know is not so much what you did. What I really want to know is what skills did you implement or did you use when you're in that role. So, for example, if I was working again, I'm just keeping this very simple, but if I'm working at Coles or Woolworths, then rather than say served customers, okay, I might say something along the lines of communicated with a diverse range of customers or stakeholders when serving on the front counter. Okay, so that's now telling me that you communicated, I might even go a step further, communicated verbally with a diverse range of stakeholders, including customers or when I was serving on the front counter. If I'm going to talk about teamwork skills, it might be something along the lines of worked within a team or worked collaboratively and independently with a team of 5 people. That's actually saying that you understand the notion that working within the team is a collaborative process, but you also need to work independently. So if you're going to talk about when you're writing your resume, and I will show you an example of one in a moment, but when you're writing your resume, you're not just stating I worked as a checkout person and I served customers. What you're saying is I worked as a checkout person and I communicated with people, I negotiated with people, I provided a high standard of customer service, and you'll notice that every time I talk about those things that I did, I've started with a verb. And so that's, again, something that we want you to think about when you're putting your resume together. So designing the resume, you write what I would suggest is that you write your resume, and many of you said that you've got them, and then you cull the information and check the content is relevant. What's important is that as an employer, I'm really interested in what you've done over the last 5 years. I'm not so interested in what you did 20 years ago. Okay, so that's important. Now, you might want to keep some stuff in there from a while back, but don't make that the emphasis. Don't put it on the front page. What I really want to see, what's going to get you noticed is what you put on that first page of your resume. Okay, so that's important. So you need to target the information. You need to lay it out in a way that that it's very clear and concise in terms of what the key things that you want us to highlight. Because remembering, I'm only looking at it for 30 seconds. So what are the key things that you want me to see? So the layout's really important. You must use headings and subheadings, and you must have plenty of white space. Don't underline all your headings. There's a lot of don'ts. I don't really want to sound too negative and pessimistic, but I want you to think of it as a nice, clean space. Keep the look of the document consistent. So don't change the fonts as you're going through it. The 4S rule is that you keep it simple, structured, succinct, and significant. And so what that's essentially saying is simple in the sense that it's a document that really is just highlighting the important components. It's in a nice structured manner. It's succinct, so it's to the point. We're not waffling on about all these things that we did. We're not, an employer is not going to read a paragraph or even a whole page of information. They just want dot points, and it's got to be significant. And the recommended fonts that we suggest is it's Times New Roman, Arial, or Helvetica. And then you'll see at the bottom here, it's a little bit darkened out, but please don't just use a template, because often those templates are not, they're templates which are designed maybe for an American market potentially. So we really want you to think of it in context of the Australian market. Some of the things are, again, just thinking about your resume, when we talk about things like, contact details, so this might be a general structure that you might use. But one of the things I don't want you to put on there is your birth date. So we don't put birth dates on there. We don't put personal information such as whether we have a particular religious belief or whether we're a particular nationality. Those things are not relevant. We don't include photographs, so sometimes people want to put their photograph on there. And the whole reason that we're doing all this is you don't want to open yourself up to some form of discrimination because somebody went, well, you're too old, or you're not you're not male or female, or something to that effect. People should employ you based on your merit, based on your qualifications and those transferable skills that you have, not on something that's personal and private. So what we do want you to put on there is your contact details, your education and qualifications, employment. You'll notice here I've got volunteer work separate because volunteer work is super very appealing to an employer that you've done volunteer work. So definitely keep that in or put that in. As we mentioned before, extracurricular activities and referees are important as well. So Natalie's just asked a question, what about adding HSC and year completed in the education heading? Look, I would say to you that if you're doing a postgraduate degree, the HSC is now somewhat irrelevant, to be quite frank. So I would just be putting my undergraduate degree and my postgraduate qualifications. I think HSC doesn't need to be there. But good question, Natalie. With an industry resume, this is something that how you might set it up. So again, we put our contact details, our qualifications, again, highlight what they are. Our professional experience, you can put professional development if there's some areas that you've developed which are, and don't confuse professional development with qualifications, okay? So when we think about, sometimes people put education and they write their degree, but then underneath it, they've done a first aid certificate. A first aid certificate is a qualification, but it's not part of it's not a 3-year degree or anything like that. So they should be treated separately. You might, if you've been involved in committees, you put them down. Any awards that you might have, professional memberships are important, professional skills and profiles, employment themes, etc. So these are all the sorts of things that you might put on your resume. So when applying for non-academic jobs, you must demonstrate how your knowledge and expertise will benefit the employer. So this is crucial because often an employer will say that they want you to understand, they want to know that you've got communication skills, but you don't just write communication skills. You've got to essentially give us some information around where you develop those skills. So if we're going to talk about communication skills, well, you've all presented in lectures, you've all worked with other people within a class environment. If you think about it from a creative thinking perspective, you've all been required to think a little bit differently or think creatively, I guess, outside the box. But this is the whole point. It's not just saying I have these skills, it's being able to say this is where it was developed. Again, I'll show you that in a moment. Annie's asked, do we have to attach our testama? No, you don't. That's unless they specifically ask for it, you don't attach anything like that. Okay, so again, here are some of the do's and some of the don'ts. So do ensure your resume is clear and easy to read. Do get to the point quickly. Use short statements or bullet points. Do differentiate yourself via academic and workplace achievements. Do focus on transferable skills you gain from unrelated casual work or volunteering. Do tailor the content to demonstrate how well you fulfill the job requirements, and do proofread your resume before you send it. Now, again, that's where we can help you. You can have someone here proofread it. When we say proofread it, we'll just check it to make sure that it's on track. We're not going to dot every I and cross every T for you, but we will check it for you. And you can come in person and see us face to face, or you can send it via the Ask a Question channel online. Okay, so I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. Don't clutter your resume with irrelevant graphics, tables, or hard to read fonts. Sometimes people put all these amazing little things in their resume, but it's not what the employer is interested in, unless you're doing a creative resume for a creative position. Then that might be the exception to that rule. But otherwise, don't put all that. Keep it clean. Don't write long, wordy paragraphs. I can't emphasize that enough. Don't include a shopping list of generic skills. So sometimes people say, I've got skills, and they just go dot, 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 all these skills listed, but they haven't told us where they developed those skills, and there's no perspective or context. Don't assume your unrelated work or volunteering is irrelevant. It's all relevant. Don't use the same version of your resume for every job application. That is a must. You must tailor your resume and application to the employer. So please don't send the same one to 20 organizations, because you're going to probably get 20 knockbacks if you haven't tailored it. Don't show poor attention to detail by making spelling mistakes and typos. Again, a small thing, but can have massive consequences if you've written your resume with a little bit carelessly. Okay, so here I'm just going to show you a website where you can actually have a look at some samples. So if you go to the University of Newcastle website, you go to the careers section, there's a couple of areas where you can get some help before you come and see us. So the first one is Career Essentials, where you can, one, build a new resume if you wish, and it will step you through how to build it. Or two, you can just have your resume reviewed. And so you submit your resume, and it will give you a score, a percentage score, and it will say that it's 50%, 60%, 80% ready to go. So that will tell you whether your resume is on track or not. Now, I would encourage you to do that. But the other thing that we've also got is these sample resumes, and I'm going to show you 3 of them in a moment. But the sample resumes essentially show you some different styles and different ways that you can put your resume together. Now, as I said before, there's many, many ways to write a resume. There's no one way to do it. So these resumes should be used more as an idea of how you can do it. Don't just copy them from start to finish, because that's not really the idea. The other thing to think about is that there are resources available on Career Hub. And so there's one on resumes, there's a resume checklist. The one that I really want to draw your attention to is this one called Action Words. So I mentioned before that when you're writing your experiences down, you put the job that you were working in, but then you have to put 3 or 4 dot points, and those 3 or 4 dot points should start with an action word. Okay, so action word being things like negotiated, implemented, managed, worked, so that type of thing. Okay, so it's important that you have a good understanding of that. And then there's also a skills list. So if you're not sure, if an employer is asking for interpersonal skills, for example, you might say, well, what are interpersonal skills? Where have I done that? This skills list will help you to identify how you can demonstrate how your interpersonal skills and or other skills, communication skills, whatever the case may be. Okay, so in summary, what we do want you to do is research the job, match your skills with the employer's requirements, consider your words, okay, very important, ask for comments from others, and make the final product presentable, which is crucial. Hugh, am I able to get those samples up? Will you do that for me, or do I?
Yeah, absolutely. If you click, I can pull them up. Otherwise, if you'd rather have that control yourself, in the bottom right corner, we've got your different tabs there. One of them is the share button, the little square.
The share button. Yeah, I'm in that. Yeah.
If you click share files,
share files. Beautiful.
Add those PDFs on the list. You can.
You're a legend. Very good.
You can select them there.
Okay, so I'll just go through and we'll just have a look at a couple of different ones. I think I need to stop the share though, don't I? Well, hang on. No, here we go. There we go. Okay. Oh, okay. All right, that's probably a little bit smaller than what I would have liked. I don't usually use Collaborate, so I apologize. I usually use Zoom, but anyway, that's But you'll see here the way the resume is laid out. So at the top, we've got the person's name. We've got some contact details. Then you've got the education, and you can see that the highlights are on the actual. I don't know if you can see my my arrow, but the highlights are on the actual qualification. So it says 2019 PhD in human geography. Okay, so that's highlighted. you'll notice that the university name is not highlighted because the employer is interested in you and the degree that you did, not the institution that you went to. And then as you can see there, going back to the question that was asked earlier in relation to whether we put our HSC on there, the HSC is not included because there's plenty of information there already. We know that this person has a Bachelor of Arts, they've done first class honours, they've done a Master of Science of Change and Development, and then they've gone in and done a PhD. So that's enough information there. Then when we start looking at the relevant experience, they've actually put or it's research experience in this case, but the research experience is a PhD in human geography, and then it just goes through and gives some information around that. Okay, so you can see the dates that the person was doing the study and some information around that. When we get to, I'll just go to the next page. Okay, so you see here we've got some research skills. So this is very heavily focused on the teaching and the publications and whatever. But even here, you see there's not like 30 publications. It's just the key ones. And what you could do in this case is that you could write something that says other publications will be made available upon request if you wanted to add that information. And again, here we've got teaching experience. So you can see here sessional academic, and again talks about what they did from a skills perspective rather than just this is what I was doing. Okay, so that's the first one that I can show you. I'll go back and we'll have a look at some others. I'm sorry this is so small. It's okay, what are we doing now? Oh no, we're good. Here we go. Where am I going?
You could always share your screen as well, and then it would show exactly what you wanted it to show.
Oh, now you're challenging me. I don't know what you're talking about. That's all right. Okay, so this is another one. Again, we've got a career profile. This one does have a number of skills that are listed, but again, they're targeted to the position. And again, we've got the education. One of the things that I will mention, a lot of times, I don't know how many people we've got here that might be bilingual or trilingual or something else, but often people don't put that on their resume. I would suggest that if you do have more than one language, then state that down as a skill, because there's many organisations that are looking for people who do have another language skill, and that can often be a good option for you. But again, you just see the layout's nice and clean, and so that's the sort of thing that we're looking for. Okay, so I'll stop that share now, and I'll just ask, does anybody have any questions in relation to any of what we just covered today? No other questions?
Oh, I have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
I often find it difficult to pick out all the key vocabulary in some of the job descriptions and applications, because you're talking about not being wordy, not being succinct and being straight to the point. But a lot of these job descriptions and the selection criteria is not that. It's very wordy. It's not succinct. And so it's really hard to kind of, how would you suggest that you kind of navigate the space of a really, I don't know, convoluted and wordy job description?
Yeah, I think one of the best things you can do, to be quite frank with you, is that you can bring your job description and your application to the careers office and have someone look over it for you. Because that's how when you first put something together, what I would suggest you do is that you just write it all down, get everything in there, and make sure it's all there, and then you've got to then go through and clean it up. And that's the same, when you're writing a paper, it's a similar approach, isn't it? You go in and you write it all down and you review it, and then you take things out. But you make a good point in the sense that sometimes they're asking for specific things, but you need, and how do you be to the point? I think one of the things that you need to, so if I'm saying that I want communication skills from the person that we're looking to employ, then what I'd like that person to tell me is that, one, they have the communication skills that we're looking for, but two, just give me a very small star example of what it is that you're, how you've implemented your communication skills. And that's usually the way around it. So using STAR as a method to, when you're talking about selection criteria, I would use the STAR format. Are you familiar with the STAR format?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I am. I forget what it stands for, but yeah.
Yeah, situation, task, action, result.
Yeah.
And what they're really interested in is not so much the situation or the task, it's the action. And so, so what we want to know is not so much about, I worked in this role and I was doing all these things and blah, blah. It really just needs to say, when I was working at John Hunter Hospital on placement, I was, working in a particular role. So you just very, very quickly state it. But the action that I took is what they really want to know. And that's really demonstrating that, so for example, if I'm working with a patient we were presented with a patient who didn't want somebody to treat them because they might have had some religious beliefs, whatever. How did you deal with it? And so you've got to just tell that story as succinctly as you can. But look, it is practice. It is a little bit of an art to do that. So there's no direct answer to that because it's going to be very different for everyone.
Yeah, I just applied for work with the Northern Territory Education Department, and that job application was horrendous in how it was written. Like it was just so dense, and it was packed full of all this jargonistic kind of type language, and it seemed to me like everyone had just said, okay, we just need all of this, and they fill it in.
Yeah, no, look, I'm familiar with what you're talking about. I've seen that many times where they are overly wordy and very poorly written, and that can make it very challenging. But the thing is to stick to the selection criteria, stick to what the skills that they're asking for in that selection criteria is, and don't get caught up in all the responsibilities of the role and what have you. Just base it on the selection criteria.
Okay, thanks, Andrew.
That's all right. Now, Annie's just asked a question: does an infographic resume increase the chance to be read by a future employer? Yeah, look, that's a tough question. I would not necessarily do an infographic resume. I don't think that's I wouldn't be going there yet, but it could be something that's kind of starting to creep in because, as I said, things are evolving, and maybe the infographic resume is something that's going to emerge. But at this moment in time, I don't feel qualified to be able to give you a response to that. Because, I mean, it's a good question because we talked about that digital footprint that you need to have. And, essentially what we're seeing at the moment is that you do have a scenario where you do have to have a digital presence. Maybe you need to have an infographic resume somewhere online that you can point people towards, but the paper version, I would still be thinking that we do it this way. But it's a good question. It's one I'm going to take back to my colleagues because I don't really know the answer. I'm sorry. Okay, any other questions before we wrap up?
Andrew, I have a quick question. Tanya here.
Hi, Tanya.
Hi. I have 14 years of work experience, but I'm now a full-time student studying an MBA. I would have usually created my resume starting with a personal profile and then going straight into the work experience. However, doing that will show a gap in the timeline. So should I now start with my personal profile and then go into the education part first, which I would have usually gone into after the work experience?
That's a great question. It's going to depend on the role. So if depending on what position you're applying for, do you start with your work experience or do you start with education? If I was applying for an academic role, then I would definitely put academic, the education first. But if you're applying for a role in industry, it might be that you need to put the work experience first.
So do I then start the work experience basically
stating that you've been studying?
That the last X years were dedicated to studies, or?
Yeah, I think that's fine, because it is. I mean, it's as much as whilst you're at university, it might not necessarily be a job that pays you as such, but it's still you're still doing something. It's still a job. It's still something that that needs to be included. So yes, you can put it down as, yeah, you can state role, occupation, student, because that's what you are.
Okay. And then would I then proceed to have some bullet points of what that entailed? Or
yes,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
absolutely, yeah,
Right.
and some bullet points to that are relevant to the position.
Mm-hmm.
So not just bullet points. They've got to be. So, you know, as I said, if you're talking about teamwork, well, in an MBA, you're probably doing team projects, and you could put something to the effect of, you know, work collaboratively and independently with a team of 4 people to develop a project in whatever it might be.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so in terms of the professional objectives, again, it was just mentioned now, and somebody's just mentioned you haven't mentioned professional objectives heading today. The professional objective at the beginning of your resume should be about 3 to 4 lines, and it should just simply state what it is that you're looking for in your next role. Okay, so a lot of people start to put on there things about, I have this skill, I have that skill. That's not really what the objective's about. The objective should be something along the lines on, I'm looking for a position where I can do whatever it might be, again, make it relevant to what they're looking for. It's really important that you don't just talk about it from the perspective of your own, I want to develop my skills. It's really, what I'd rather you said was something along the lines of, I want to be able to implement and utilize my skills in these particular areas by working with an organization such as, and then name them. Does that answer your question, Natalie? Okay. All right, guys, so I'm just conscious of the time. It's 2:27. So if there's any final questions, happy to take one final question. Otherwise, I'll hand back over to Hugh. Hugh, can I just get the, sorry, I just want to get the, sorry, I might
slides back up.
The slides back up, just to get the last slide up.
Of course.
I think it's okay. I think I've done it. Okay, I'm good. I'm doing it now. The presentation will be made available. So I know that Hugh's already got it. So and Hugh has recorded this. So I'm sure that it will be made available for anybody that wishes to. There we go. So yes, so the presentation slides will be available. I'll ask Hugh to answer that. Where can I access this recording? So Hugh will answer that in a moment. But just before we go there, if you do require any additional help, which I hope by now you're all thinking that you do, you'll come and see us at the Career Service. And we are located at Callaghan on level 3 in the Shortland building, which is right above, if people are familiar with Subway sandwich bar, we're right on top of them. If you're in New Space, then go to the Student Central ground floor and just ask for, and somebody will come down and see you. But that will be based on specific times that they're available. And in the Rimba and Sydney at this point in time, you can request an appointment via Ask a Question in Career Hub. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. It's been a pleasure being able to present this to you. I'll hand over back to Hugh, who will give you some information about where you might be able to access the slides and or the recording. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew, for your time and your expertise. With regard to the recording, yes, as soon as this is available, and it should be in the next couple of days, it will go up on a YouTube channel that we're putting together for all of our archived workshops. With the old association, we used to have an archive page on the website. Now we are modernizing that slightly, so probably sometime next week, I'll be sending an email to students with links to all the different YouTube channels we've got. One of them is specifically for workshop recordings. So these will be on there. We've also got some of our recorded yoga sessions with Alex, some of our previous Meet Your Postgrad Supports workshops, all that stuff will be available there. Yeah, so you'll hear about it as soon as it goes live in the next week or so.